Hi, this is Steve Behrman, and welcome to Signs of the Upwising. The Great Upwising is my playful yet pertinent term to describe a rapidly maturing body politic, awakening beyond woke and anti-woke, seeing that we're all on the same side and that we can turn our mutually destructive political tug-of-war into a mutually beneficial tug of peace where we're all pulling together in the same direction. So my Signs of the Uprising podcast is designed to point out islands of awakened sanity and to help this movement without a name gain traction and momentum. Well, I'm very happy to announce that my guest today is Laura George, and I've known Laura for many years. She is the director of the Oracle Institute, which is an educational charity and think tank that studies the nexus between religion, politics, human rights, and conscious evolution. Oracle Institute is headquartered at the Peace Pentagon, a real building, a training and retreat center located in Independence, Virginia, along the ancient New River. I like that paradox. It's ancient and yet it's new. We'll talk about that. Currently, Laura is helping spearhead, or as the Swami prefers calling it, spearhead, because we have way too many spears out there, spearheading the Founding Mothers Movement, which is a global coalition for planetary partnership and peace. And that's going to be the main topic of our conversation today. Welcome, Laura.
Hi, Steve. It's really nice to be with you today. And I love that intro. Yes, may we find partnership and peace, our
Yeah,
motto at Founding Mothers Movement.
very good. Well, I think we're all on the same track here. So before we get into the current project, the Founding Mothers Movement, why don't you tell us a bit about the Oracle Institute and the Peace Pentagon? We visited, Trudy and I visited there in 2012. I did a comedy show and we had a long conversation while the Peace Pentagon was under construction. So I want to know a little bit about your history. What, created your political awakening or awareness and what led up to the Oracle Institute?
Well, I was a relatively normal human before 9/11 hit. And that was when my awakening started in earnest. And I was a lawyer and I had three little kids at the time. And I quit the practice of law so that I could start the Oracle Institute. I am a 9/11 truther. I'm going to throw that out. I'm not a conspiracy person, but there's no doubt in my mind we had something to do with a planned implosion of the Twin Towers and Tower 7. So began the journey, and we started out mainly interfaith because George Bush was president at the time and he was using crusader language that I found terrifying. Um, but in Northern Virginia, which is where we were outside of Washington, D.C., it was sort of preaching to the choir because it's already a pretty progressive and pluralistic environment there. So I took on the challenge of moving to what I call the tip of the Bible Belt. And I'm in Southern Virginia, right along the New River, which is completely misnamed because it's not only the oldest river in America, it's the oldest river in the Western Hemisphere, and some geologists think it's the oldest in the world. So we moved down to this very fundamentalist area, and we've been here since 2010. And you're right, you visited in 2012. That's when we broke ground on the Pentagon. And fast forward, yeah, as things have deteriorated even further since 9/11 in terms of, everything, whether we're talking socio-spiritual growth or economic, solidarity, all of these factors are contributing to the poly crisis we have now. And so we are now all in on trying to come up with a solution to the poly crisis. And for us, that's Founding Mothers Movement.
So you were an attorney and then you made a shift based on, uh, just to go back to 9/11, did you get immediately this idea that this was some kind of an inside job? Did that happen immediately or did that evolve over a period of a year or two?
Well, I was already following everything. I mean, we really are a think tank at the Oracle Institute. So my passion at the time was religion, and I was studying all the major religions, and I understood fully what was happening in the Middle East. And so I have to say, almost immediately, I knew it was a false flag. None of it made sense. And then, of course, it got even worse with Bush blaming Saddam Hussein and on and on and on. So, no, I knew relatively quickly. And then I became involved with 9/11 Truth,
Hmm.
which is the architects and engineers who
Right.
can clearly tell us that no modern building is ever pancaked like that. It was not a fire, it was a planned implosion with thermite. So, once I realized, to sum it up, once I realized how seriously in trouble the United States was, my beloved country, that's when I went all in and became an interfaith minister first. And so yeah, that's when I made the transition. And just to put a picture frame around Oracle, which is the charity, we have a spirituality school, we have an award-winning publishing house, and then there's the peace practice. And now we're mostly focused on the peace practice.
So when you say the peace process, what does that really mean these days? What does the peace process really mean to you in terms of reality and making an impact rather than just the
Right.
words?
Right. All right. Well, that's why we started Founding Mothers Movement, which actually started as a collaboratory of the Evolutionary Leaders Circle. And I was asked to convene and bring together the women. And this was just after Roe was reversed. So at the time, that was the big hair on fire issue that Roe versus Wade had been reversed. We brainstormed. Rianne Eisler was in the group. We had many notable women, scientists, Anna Lou Smitsman, Anna Dea Judith. There's a lot of women involved. And we pitched ideas to one another. And when I pitched the Founding Mothers Movement, everybody said, well, that encapsulates everything. So we launched in July of 2024, and we're coming up actually on our 2-year anniversary. We've been holding a women's congress ever since. And just to give you a quick history on the original International Congress of Women, that started in 1878 after Julia Ward Howe issued the Mother's Day Proclamation, which was actually a call for a peace congress. And they met until women had the right to vote in America and in most of Europe. And they sort of shut down after World War II. It went dormant actually before World War II. But they were singularly involved at the end with the Kellogg-Briand Pact, which was supposed to be the treaty to end all wars. Almost every nation on the planet signed it. This is after World War I. And they really thought their women's work was done, that they had achieved their mission. So we are standing on the shoulders of giants. We call this one the Global Women's Congress. We do have women from all over the world involved, and it's easy to become a delegate in the Congress. You just have to join your partner group. If you're in a group with 24, 25 or more people, you qualify as a delegate. And your real question was, what does a peace practice look like? So we've spent the first year just really ramping up. We had to get our foundational documents in order. And I want to say we're not another nonprofit. That's like the last thing we need is another nonprofit. This is truly a coalition. And we did launch campaigns coinciding with Project 2025 launching. So we've been at it for about a year and a half. And because there were more pre-existing and more powerful coalitions already going, we've actually joined them. So it's not all about join our coalition. So we're members. We have our own Founding Mothers chapter of Indivisible, for instance. That's the largest group in the United States. We also have a chapter with Red, White, and Blue, which is another huge women's coalition around the country. And we also are part of some international coalitions. So we're basically trying to unify everybody, because otherwise the bad guys are going to keep going. And unless we can start a true global movement, which has never really happened before, the closest maybe we've come is some 350.org protests, Occupy. Indivisible is now going global because the No Kings is resonating around the world. But I believe until we really unify, we the people are going to keep getting screwed, and we're not going to make it into the new paradigm that we're all hoping for.
I remember our conversation when we were visiting there. You and I were going for a walk, and at that time you were, being influenced by Ken Wilber and his work, and you came back from one of the Wilber events or something, feeling like, wow, he doesn't think that we're going to have that a critical mass of the uncritical masses amassed uh, to actually move the dial and move the paradigm. That too many people were stuck in these um, uh, lower vibrations or whatever you want to call it. So I'm just curious. That's 14 years. It's 14 years ago we saw you, almost, not quite. How has that played out? Do you think that that's still a factor? Are you feeling more hopeless, hopeful? What is the area? Okay, say more about how you feel that evolution is taking place, and then, what areas do you see hope and promise?
Sure. Yeah, for those who aren't familiar with Ken Wilber's work and spiral dynamics, it is a must learn if you want to understand what's happening geopolitically. Um, okay, so yes, I think the collective consciousness has moved in the positive direction. However, the democracy index is moving in the opposite direction, and those in power are moving in the opposite direction. So I retain the hope, and I think the statistical research backs up the fact that yes, humans are slowly evolving. We've been slowly evolving, and by the way, there's no leapfrog. We're not going to leapfrog into some, fifth dimension or all this crazy new age stuff I read. Um, no, it's sad, but it's slow. It's laborious. Um, but yes, I think the collective consciousness has gained what we would call moral fiber, higher value sets over time. However, those drawn to positions of power are way down on the spectrum of consciousness, sadly. And famously, Claire Graves, who actually was the professor
Yeah,
who started this research,
yeah,
and I say, Graves' theory is Maslow and steroids, right? Graves'
yeah.
theory, and you got the keys to the kingdom in terms of understanding human development. He said the scariest combination is a stage 3 human, which is the power meme, in charge of a stage 4 nation, which is the fundamentalist meme, because they will kill on command. And you can trick them with religion, and you can trick them with patriotism that's not correctly labeled. And sadly, that's what we're seeing in large parts of the world. I mean, we right now have essentially a stage 3 human in charge of the United States of America. I mean, I used to think he's just your classic stage 5 greedy human. Oh no, he is sadly a full-fledged member of the power meme, which is a huge regression for the United States to have a leader of that level
A full-fledged member
of the power meme, which is very, if you look at the spectrum of
yeah,
consciousness, that's a stage that most of us go through in elementary school, right? Like we are a
yeah.
bully for a day even, and we get over that sense of might makes right, which is the hallmark of that meme. Um, so we're in real trouble right now. And we've seen the pendulum, the political pendulum swing wilder and wilder. So I would argue that Obama was our first second tier president. I would argue that he's a stage 7 human, which means now you're seeing the whole systems level view of the planet. And now we've swung all the way to a stage 3. Anyway, for those who don't know the chart, look it up. But it's scary. It's pretty scary.
Well, my 9/11 was COVID.
Mm,
And so during COVID, I fell away from the progressive narrative because it denied everything that I knew, everything that Trudy and I had been, the people that we relied on for our accurate information, where all of a sudden the disinformation doesn't. And I watched so many of my friends and colleagues drink that Kool-Aid, just as people went along with the 9/11 narrative. And so for me, I began to see at that point, I began to see Obama differently. and when I go back and look at what happened, if you go back to the New Deal, let's say, it was Eisenhower, the Republican, who essentially institutionalized the New Deal. In other words, it made, all of that got created during the FDR administration was then legitimized as something for our whole country. Remember, it was Richard Nixon who created the Environmental Protection uh, uh,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
um, whatever it was, department. And so what I saw in retrospect, particularly, but I was seeing it then, when Obama got elected, of course, I voted for him, but then the Swami said, well, the empire has a new face, but it still has the same big fat ass, right? And so what essentially was that Obama legitimized neoliberalism, and that all of the things that we opposed during the George Bush administration got quietly institutionalized. And the big turning point that didn't happen was when Obama bailed out Wall Street and not Main Street. And that's when
Yeah.
many of the conservatives that I knew who voted for him as a reform candidate, recognizing, his personality, again, from the personality standpoint, you could look at how he presents. I mean, when Bruce Lipton and I wrote Spontaneous Evolution, the first version of it, the hardcover version, this is right when Obama was elected. It's like 2008, and then we're going, the evolution has come. We recognized Obama as the embodiment. The fact that people voted for Obama was the embodiment of the evolution. But it was a bait and switch. And I think that that's the big, big problem that we have is that all of the movements that you've talked about, every one of the organizations is a left identified organization. And right now, we have to get the people who are falling off of the MAGA bandwagon because they recognize that they've been betrayed, just as the red pill blues recognize they were betrayed by COVID and by the corporate Democrats who, they're like Lucy pulling the football away every time Charlie Brown tries to kick it. That's my representation of the Democratic Party. So our friend and colleague, our mutual friend and colleague, Eleanor Kane, says that, and she said it several years ago, it was before the 2024 election, she said that it's no longer left versus right, it's the oligarchs versus all of us. So how do we mobilize the all of us above and beyond the woke and the non-woke and the anti-woke, above and beyond the culture wars that have us uh, mobilize one against the other so that we actually have a real movement. The only kind of movement, in my view, that's going to be able to hold the system accountable is one that's not identified with either political party, because that's death, because you're going to get the opposition of the other side. So I call it a great upwising because we have to wise up to the divide and conquer racket that because of the culture issues, and I know how we identify, um, nobody I know, even people who voted for Donald Trump that I know, nobody wants to see uh, the the radical Christian right, who want the rapture to come. No one wants to see those people in charge. But because of how that political party has to manage its constituency, again, you don't have a majority, you're basically rich people without a majority. How do you mobilize these people? And so my view is that in falling toward the identity politics meme, where you get a coalition of oppressed people, and then you keep broadening what it means to be oppressed, and then you have an inclusion statement that excludes 50% of the people who disagree with you. This is not a formula for moving forward. So I just want to say, how do we address this? And I totally understand, mobilizing these organizations that are already aligned against Donald Trump. But we got to see that Donald Trump is a opportunistic infection that with incidents like the 9/11, where people have been made to believe horrific lies because it's too uncomfortable to face the truth. How do we bring that truth movement, in a certain regard, the divide and conquer aspect of the truth movement, to a broader audience? And then how does this movement that you're involved with, how does it broaden so it's not, oh, it's just a bunch of progressive women and we don't believe in that, and so we can't be part of that. How do we broaden that to really have something that's going to have an impact?
All right, so we use spiral dynamics because you're right. The culture war is between, again, referring to the chart, stage 4, fundamentalist humans, and stage 6, pluralist humans. That's the culture war.
Yeah,
And that's what the bad guys keep us focused on. They use a lot of religion and they use a lot of woke. Going second tier, and that's the only reason I mentioned Obama. He made a lot of mistakes. Um, Means you see the whole system. So we're being quite careful in Founding Mothers movement to ensure that people who are coming into the movement at the strategic level understand that a meta unity coalition means you're going to be working with people who have a different worldview
right.
out of the gate. And I can give you one small example. We had a delegate, a Muslim delegate from Iraq, who was concerned that she was seeing some things on our website referencing LGBTQ rights. And she said, that's a sin. And I said, are you telling me that, you believe the Quran interpreted properly means it's a sin and you're concerned for your safety if you're part of the Founding Mothers? And she said, no, Laura, it's a sin. She's welcome in the Founding Mothers movement. Does she
Yeah,
share my worldview? Heck no.
no,
So that is why every progressive movement in the second half of the 20th century has essentially failed, because they haven't built a big tent movement, and we end up quarreling with one another, taking the bait that they throw us to separate us, divide and conquer. Okay, so I'm totally in agreement with you on that. So this is not a left-right thing, just like Eleanor said. This is an all hands on deck. If we want the human experiment to continue, get your ass in gear thing. I mean, it is dire right now that those of us who can agree, just at a baseline, that we really like to vote, that we really like to have a stake in deciding our own futures, that's it. That's the only litmus test, right? I mean, another litmus test for us would be, do you believe that a woman has the right to bodily autonomy and all of that stuff? But other than that, Founding Mothers movement is come on in, because we have got to get to the two mission goals of Founding Mother, which is planetary partnership. I mean, and you sent me an article we came on. Men and women are going at each other now. I mean, just on the streets kind of stuff. I have two sons in their 30s, so I know what's going on out there. So there's that issue. When are we going to become true partners on the earth plane? And I would argue that as long as you're worshiping a guy in the ethereal plane, it ain't ever going to happen for women. So we need to update the Godhead. And then number 2, peace. Right? I mean, if every woman, or 90% or 80% of the women on the planet just went, I'm sitting down till this fighting stops. Oh, it would stop very quickly. I think within about a week. So that's one of our goals. So, I mean, we can parse it, the partnership piece, the partnership part of the mission, and the peace part of the mission. But that's why when we peeled the onion of the poly crisis, when we get down to the core, what we think will have the greatest impact is if we can get what I call the law of gender finally solidified on planet Earth. I mean, we're talking a kindergarten level law, right? Wow.
now what do you say,
Wow.
the
Really?
law
Women
of
are so
gender,
oppressed?
what do you mean by that? The kindergarten level law of gender. Tell me, what do you mean by that?
Okay, well, I'll just throw this out for people who are into Hermeticism. That was the first law. There's 7 laws of the universe. The very
Yeah,
first one is the law of gender.
yeah.
And this planet hasn't even learned the law of gender. And like karma is like 3 up, and as above, so below is the 6th. The very first law is the law of gender. Everything is dual on this plane, everything is gendered on this plane. And the fact that men and women still are partners is beyond belief to me. Like, I feel like an alien on this planet. It's astonishing. So if we can solve that, then everything else starts to change, because when women have an equal seat at any table, whether it's a boardroom table, in a parliament or the kitchen table, decision making changes and the outcomes of decisions change. Women are way better in general at web thinking. We see the domino effect of interrelationship. And if you go down this path and you take this branch and then you take this branch, how many people and in what ways they're impacted, our brains work that way. Men are more about, let's get from point A to point Z as fast as possible. And if there's collateral damage, oh well. And these are generalities. But when we have both sexes working as teammates, I think we can solve almost any problem we're facing. And
Well,
but until we do, go
as
ahead.
many people who are watching this know, and many people don't know, that a lot of our American system of governance was taken from the Iroquois Nation.
Mm-hmm.
The balance of powers, the Confederacy. But the one piece that they couldn't quite wrap themselves around was the Council of Grandmothers, where the
Uh-huh.
elder women in the tribe were the ones who decided whether the tribe went to war or not, or they could impeach an unscrupulous or incompetent chief. So that was 250 years ago now, or 200, a little less than that. And so over the course of time, when you don't have that um, balanced input into a system, you weave yourself out of the web of life and the web of nature. And that's where we are. However, the complicated problem, I kind of grew up as the young, professional in Washington, D.C. at the time of the beginning of the women's movement. A lot of my friends
Mm-hmm.
were part of that women's movement. My girlfriend and then some other people were part of a women's theater group and all of that. So I was watching that from its inception. And then of course the Vietnam War is, as I've come to realize, our parents probably, my dad was a World War II veteran. And so coming home from World War II, having defeated the Axis powers and Nazism, there was a whole different feeling about what it meant to be a warrior in the service of literally fighting evil. Well, when the Vietnam War came, warriorship was associated with evil, with an unjust war. And I think at that point, the two political parties separated into the men's party and the women's party.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have all of the yang energy over here. My joke, some jokes are not funny. My joke used to be, oh, the Republican Party, they're playing hardball. The Democrats are playing hardly have balls. So I think that's been so all the courage is on that side, if you know what I mean. That all of you described it as we have to move forward, and it doesn't matter what the collateral damage is. Sometimes that happens to be true. You know, there was not a lot of mourning in this country about the firebombing of Dresden, for example. People died there. Those were, and people who are caught up in the political system, whether they voted for the guy or not. We didn't vote for Trump, but we're caught up in that system. Whatever he creates, we're part of that. And as Americans, we're identified with that. So what happened after the Vietnam War was this separation. Then, of course, you have the Kennedy assassination, which is the first 9/11, um, where it was a perpetration that seems very, 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 very likely. Uh, the story we were told is not the real story. So, if you can imagine in family dynamics, when there's been a perpetration, how does it impact the psyche of that family? So, you can trace our dysfunction perhaps back to Dallas 1963 to where all of a sudden we were, I was my freshman year in college, that was we were going to have the Alliance for Progress and the Peace Corps. And as we found out later, JFK was going to pull the plug on the Vietnam War. He's going to normalize relations with Cuba. he was going to, begin the disarmament process with Khrushchev, who was on board with that. But then a funny thing happened. So we are dealing with the residue of that bad doing, right? And
Yeah.
so that's why my view is much more meta party view than it was even in those days, and that the trans of separation is so powerful, just like you had to create alliance with somebody who it wasn't just a philosophical issue about homosexuality, it was an existential issue. Well, my colleague Richard Flyer, who wrote the Birthing the Symbiotic Age, he is making coalitions with, all kinds of Christian groups. Mainly, I would have to say more on the progressive side because they're open to the bigger picture, but also reaching out to everyone who recognizes that the system is broken and that the only way we're going to do this is by um, combining forces and rehumanizing one another. So I think that part of I want to ask you something to kind of unpack the war between the sexes as you're talking about your sons who are in their 30s. Say more about how that's different than, let's say, when you were 30 years old, and then why that is, where it's going, and how we can break that trends and actually create, you know, turning dueling dualities into dynamic duo dance partners. That would be the deal, right? So
Yeah.
I want to hear from you.
Whew. So this is a global phenomenon, as we know. Birth rates are way down, dating is down. I mean, there are multiple reasons for it. We know that social media is directly impacting young people's ability to even interact with one another. I mean, they just don't even go out and hang out the way we used to. So some of that is causing isolationism and awkwardness. And we see with the, Gen Z and the generation that's coming up after them, I mean, they're staying at home longer. They're being, kept children longer, frankly, because of the cultural container that we've developed here. Um, I think, though, in addition to all of that, external stimuli that's creating barriers to the sexes complementing each other as nature intended, is the fact that women have had enough. Women have had enough. And it's not just in the US, it's all over the world. Yeah, that article you sent me was citing stats from Asia and from Africa. And so women aren't wanting to have babies for a whole host of reasons. One of the reasons is the poly crisis itself. Who wants to bring a child into a world that this is in this much trouble? But there is a huge gap in understanding between the sexes right now. And I think it's being fueled by the white Christian nationalists push. I don't know if you're familiar with the trad wife phenomenon that's happening right now. Um, Stigma attached to having children out of wedlock is essentially gone. So I'll let you know that where I live, they're having babies just fine in high school.
Yeah.
Um, but the families, they're not getting married. So what we're seeing is more educated women, professional women choosing not to even, well, not to have children, but also not to date. And we see situation in which the children that are being born are not receiving the care they need. So part of it is political as well. I mean, if we were in a geopolitical environment like Norway, Sweden, Finland, those countries, I think you'd see women having babies again, but we don't have the support for it either from our institutions. So we got a big problem. And that's why I get more and more nervous about what I call the Handmaid's Tale timeline every day. I saw Margaret Atwood interviewed recently, and the journalist asked her, how did you see this coming? What made you think that there could, become a time when women would become like oppressed again, and not just oppressed again, but also essentially enslaved. Her answer was, I don't know how anyone else didn't see it coming. And she's right. I mean, after the heyday of the 70s, I mean, from the 80s on, I mean, I came out of law school in the 80s, so I participated in that whole me generation, uh, I don't know, Wall Street sort of expansion. Um, but it's been downhill ever since in terms of how we support families and how we support young mothers. And I think women have just had enough.
Well, speaking of women, what about the transgender movement, which didn't seem to be a blip 10 years ago? In other words, I'm not talking about the people that we know, like, who recognize that they were born in the wrong body and have the right to make the switch and so on. But it wasn't a culture. It was simply somebody being supported in their individual choice to do that and finding other people who go, yes. That's exactly right. And it seemed like we were at a point, maybe 2017, there was a book that was written that talked about how gay marriage and transgender surgery and all that was, yeah, it's accepted because everybody had people in their families who were gay or even transgender and made the transition, and they wanted to keep the love intact. And so people who had been prejudiced had to really examine that and embrace their loved one and their loved one's partner or partners, right? Well, now we're in a situation of uh, somebody we know just retired as a teacher, in high school teacher, and I would say that she's a progressive, most definitely politically progressive, but in a certain regard has conservative sensibilities, like traditional family sensibilities, but progressive. And she said that it's been, over the years, there have always been the kids that she's seen, yep, born in the wrong tribe, and they need to be back, they need to be where their heart is. And so that's always been supported. But she said in recent years, it's become a culture and a fad of people who are so unsure about who they are in all regards. And maybe some of this has to do with, the hormones in our food and that sort of thing that's been disruptive of sperm count and all of the various environmental impacts that we've had. But now, there's a culture
Mm-hmm.
where just as I knew women back in the 70s who were not lesbians, but who decided to be a lesbian as a political statement, right?
I
So
got a
now
lot of
this is happening now. So I want to hear your take on that.
I got a take on it. First off, I agree it's become a cultural issue as opposed to a private personal rights issue. Same thing with abortion. Same thing with all of our rights are now open for debate, rights that should only be discussed within families and privately. So that's number one. The state is infringing heinously. Number two, I'm going to mention the law of gender again, because while I agree with you that some people are born in the wrong body, it happens, born in the
Yeah.
wrong body. What I think happens more often than that, though, is that the law of gender is misinterpreted. So I'm going to talk about it for just a couple minutes, because part of the law of gender in Hermeticism is not equating our bodies with masculine and feminine principles. I lead with the masculine, right? I mean, the people who know me all know I lead with my masculine. And frankly, had I been born within the last decade, my parents might have fallen prey to this ridiculous trend and trans me, because the minute I realized only boys can be altar attendants, I was raised Catholic. I was like, wait, what?
Yeah.
And then the minute I wasn't just as strong as the boys, that happened maybe around, I don't know, fifth grade. I was like, damn, I want to be a boy. And the reason I would say it is because it became evident to me at a very young age this is a man's world. I was already being discriminated against. And so I just harken back to that sometimes. And I think, oh my God, in the hands of the wrong parent today, they might have trans me. So I don't believe in any kid being trans, period. I think it's a decision that needs to be made as an adult. Um, and I do think that there are situations in which it's totally appropriate. But I think it's become yet another wedge issue to keep us separated, to keep we the people separated. And we need to stop bothering with each other's business. That's private stuff, period. And if I have a pregnancy that's either unwanted or could harm me, then I should have the right to have an abortion. No one's business but mine. So it's all this, and Nixon, back to Nixon for a second, he had no problem with abortion until his strategists, early is understanders a word? Early compilers of this sort of spiral dynamics research knew that that was an issue that could propel them if they motivated the Christian right, who also didn't give a damn about abortion back then. It was not on anybody's radar. It just wasn't a thing. And it became a thing over time. So we're living in an era in which our personal rights are being violated in many, many, many ways.
When we came up against the vaccine mandates, I went back to Our Bodies Ourselves. I knew the women from that collective who wrote that back in the 70s, and somehow I called it irony deficiency. Seeing a doctor won't help, but seeing a paradox will. And the paradox is
That's funny.
that one side cannot apply the same formula to the issues of the other side because the sides are so captured.
Yeah.
Because if I say like what you just said about this transgender thing, if you were on campus, you'd be kicked off campus for saying
Oh, I
that.
know.
And so
But
that's
I
our
do think it's
side,
mainly,
right?
I don't
Yeah,
want to be really clear though, so I'm not
yeah,
misinterpreted. I think it's absolutely about how you feel inside. And because we've labeled certain intuitions and intentions and the way we navigate the world as masculine and other traits as feminine,
yeah,
if you're born male and you're a nurturing human and you really are, you know, seeing the fabric of life and you're about relationships, you get called, bad things as a kid, like you're a
sure.
wimp or you're this, you're that. So it's our social um imprinting that I think is mostly to blame for people not feeling comfortable in their own skin.
Yeah, and I think you laid it out really well in looking at these influences, and I'd say that the more we've we don't have a sane and sacred center at the center of our society. Again, when we threw religion out, we threw the baby Jesus out with the bathwater, so to speak. And so there's been nothing to replace it but the power of money and materialism. And so a lot of these social movements become quasi-religious. And I would say even the right-wing religious movement has nothing to do with God, really. It has to do with power.
Yep.
And so when people are feeling disempowered in certain ways or dismissed, I had an incident a number of years ago when Trudy and I were buying a car. It was right after Spontaneous Evolution was published in 2009. And the guy who's doing the financials says, "Well, what do you do for a living?" I said, "I do comedy, and I just wrote a book called Spontaneous Evolution." He goes, "Oh, I've accepted the Lord Jesus as my savior. I don't believe in evolution." Okay. So we had to spend the entire afternoon the next day with this guy, right? While we're waiting for the car to be delivered. So I say, "Tell me, how'd you come to your faith?" It's Vietnam veteran, total PTSD, a gutter drunk, literal gutter drunk. And, his life is just totally lost. And he has this vision of Jesus reaching out his hand, and he's taking Jesus' hand, and lifting him up. And I could see this was a conversion of the heart. It was not whatever the mental stuff that they perpetrate, this is a conversion of the heart. And at some point, he just started sobbing and he hugged Trudy and I and he said, "You're the first people who've ever asked about this." And of course, he was dead set against anything New Age, right? He says, "Well, the next time the Swami comes to town, tell me, I want to see his performance." So what happens is these barriers, were of dehumanization. I mean, to me, when I think about the partnership society, you know, I think about the bonobos as
Yeah,
opposed to the regular chimps who are now at war with each other, um, who have a chimp on their shoulder or whatever it is. And the idea that in the bonobo society, it was the elder women who prevented the bullying. It was not a women-dominated
right.
society. It was an egalitarian society. So in the time we have like 10, 15 minutes left, how in this founding mothers movement, I mean, again, I understand the power of mobilizing women, you know, let's go back to Lysistrata, it goes all the way back to
Yeah, yeah,
Greece, right? That power of mobilizing women to go, you know, we're mad as hell and we're not going to take it anymore and we're going to stop supporting this, right? Um, so I understand that perspective and so on, but but the cultural wars are so dominant that I think it's also important. And men are lost, boys are lost, okay? And I hear this from a lot of people who are teaching. Um, and so I guess men hold up half the sky too, right? So how do we deal with that half the sky um, in a way that doesn't feed reverting back to the patriarchy on one hand, and then having men simply become the men's auxiliary to the women's movement? How do you see the coming from the law of gender, so to speak, and recognizing each of us has those qualities that we perhaps have to integrate, right? How do
yeah.
you see the founding mothers movement um, creating the space for men to be men and go, yeah, I agree with this. I'm with this. I don't want to fight these wars. That's not me. It ain't me. It ain't me. I ain't no fortunate son, right? I'm not going to fight that war. How do you get that? Because I engage with a lot of people on the right town that I live in. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to a very conservative breakfast club that I've been invited to kind of meet those people and hear what they have to say. Um, so I'm looking at how the rehumanization process can break the trance so that people go, we don't agree about this. And I work with people very closely who I don't agree with on a number of things, on some very serious things. However, we do agree that we need to create this culture of connection where we overgrow these differences. So how do you see um, the future of the founding mothers movement and how that doesn't become captured by the progressive side, which is so easy to happen because, oh, it's women. Well, it's got to be progressive, unless they're the trad gals, right? So
Yeah.
how do you do that? How do you do that expansion, and how do you communicate that?
So it's really hard now to find common ground because everyone's so polarized. We know that. So out of the gate, we're in an extremely challenging environment. And, in my last book, I talked about the fact that we can talk about a dog, the species of canine, right? Essentially, a dog is a dog is a dog. I mean, some are maybe a little more nurturing, some are we breed to be a little more aggressive, but basically, we can lump all dogs in together. Not so with humans. The spectrum of consciousness is so vast. So, if you had looked at the human race even 10,000 years ago, most of us were operating at the same level of consciousness. So that when, you know, coming forward now about 5,000 years, when someone like Jesus or Buddha shows up, they're like, people are like, wow, these guys, wow, they're avatars. You know, Wilbur has a joke that if Buddha were alive today, he'd be a dime a dozen.
Ha ha ha.
So, he's over exaggerating the point, but the point is we've got everything from barbarians to Buddhas walking the planet now, which makes it even more challenging. So it's not just left and right and blue and red stuff. It's like, wow, the spectrum of consciousness is vast. How are we all going to get along? And, I make fun of the New Agers like you do because they have their own version of the rapture. It's just,
Yeah.
the reverse rapture. I mean,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
just
yeah.
ludicrous, right? So we've got this planet. We're all on it. We're going to share it. No one's rapturing out, but we do have the potential to annihilate ourselves. So I think we get back to basics, as in what is still common ground. And I think if we can, first off, everyone loves, as Wilbur famously says in one of his books, even Nazis love, so love isn't, nobody's got a hold on that. And no one else has a market on how we collectively choose to move together. So we've got to find, and what I mean by that is, I don't think another Gandhi's going to show up. I don't think another Martin Luther King's going to show up. Like, we have to collectively figure this out now. That's why these masters and these amazing humans came to teach. Like, we know everything we need to know to solve this problem. So that's why I think it needs to be collective. It needs to be humans themselves taking responsibility for that which is good and beautiful and true. And I think we can still agree on what is good and beautiful and true as long as we respect our differences. So this whole live and let live thing that I grew up with, it's gone. Everybody's opinionated and in everybody else's personal space and personal choices. And we just got to get back to love thy neighbor, even though he, she looks a little different and might have a slightly different take on some of the issues of the day. It's just not that hard. There's a book, everything I needed to know I learned in kindergarten. Like this, we learned this shit in kindergarten. We learned how to share. We learned how to be kind. We learned how to respect differences. And then we've grown up and our culture is just hard right now on both sides. So much judgmentalism and so much. Anyway, so that's what I think you and I actually have in common, Steve, because I can see all of it. I can see all the puzzle pieces and they're not clicking in yet. And we got to figure out how to take all of that and make a beautiful mosaic instead of utter chaos. And I do think collectively we're evolved enough to do it. So let's end with the oligarchs who are not evolved enough to do it. And they're the ones running the show. That is the enemy. That view of our future is the enemy. Their view of the new world couldn't be any more different than mine and yours. That's what we need to focus on. And I think that takes, again, a global movement to call them out, to shame them, even though most of them aren't even capable of shame, but to get, I mean, Orban being voted out just was actually only a week ago. Huge, huge, good sign. And I mean, their politicians are literally doing the happy dance on the stage. I mean, the
Yeah.
people of Hungary are just, oh my God, we're out of jail. So if we can tap into that sort of camaraderie that we're all in this together, and it's really these sociopaths with a lot of money and a lot of power who are holding us back, I think we're going to be okay. But we got to pull together and we got to get serious and we got to vote like our lives depend on it because
What votes we have? Yeah. And the other thing, something I found very valuable is the concept of Wetiko. Uh, uh, because and this is it was in a book called about 40 years ago, called Columbus and Other Cannibals. And
yeah,
Wetiko is a form of cannibalism where you eat you devour everything in sight. And Paul Levy, the Jungian, has really popularized this term, and I like it
yeah,
because it's about an energy field. And see, I think part of the awakening beyond woke and anti-woke, part of the awakening is recognizing that behind the scenes, Wetiko is operating and has control of both power systems, whether it's the
Yeah.
Democratic Party power system or the Republican Party. And so now more and more people are coming to recognize that those structures and the entirety of that system is not fixable in this regard. It's got to be replaced. And the only thing that can replace it, as you suggested, is this awakening awareness above and beyond this divide that the 90% of us who are not sociopaths, who share the virtues and values, who resonate with truth, beauty, and goodness, I said my joke is that, most people have not seen God, but we've all seen good, and we know what good looks like. And
Yes, we
so,
do.
and so I think that's part of the awakening. And the antidote or the balance of AI is real people in real communities on the ground. They're not bots, they're real people. And so I think there's going to be a wave of practical relocalization. It's already happening with food and I
Mhm.
think food is going to be, rather than the identity issues that divide us, there are the identical issues that unite us. Clean air, clean water, clean food, clean government. And part of breaking the trance is saying we're a stand for that. We're a stand for the human heart above the machine, because that's what we're dealing with now.
Yeah,
Because they've captured, the machine, they're working very closely with the machine because the human
they
heart
are.
does not count in their domain.
And they're educating the machine. I have a friend, Anna Smithman, who's a system scientist, and she's all in on AI and has developed a game that is intended to not just be entertainment for humans and teach humans about teamwork. It's training AI at the same time because in the game you can't win if you're a solo player and you just want to destroy. I mean, you can destroy if you want. You can go in the game and you can break things, but you won't win the game.
Yeah.
And what she's telling me and what I'm reading about AI, it's not good. Like they just know how to pass every ethics test that we give them, and we're seeing really aberrant behavior out of AI already. Whether it's pressing, I mean, whether it's reached true AGI or not, I'm not sure, but it sure seems close to me, and it's scary stuff that's coming out. And don't give them thumbs or weapons, and that's what our government's going to do. DARPA is the largest investor in
Yep.
AI.
Yep. And so I think that this is, as the better things get, the worse things get. That as
Yeah.
there's a expanded awakening, they call these apocalyptic times, and that is the lifting of the veil. So all of these things that, all of the people that you tried to talk to about 9/11, and I actually had a woman say to me, well, if 9/11 were an inside job, I would have heard about that on NPR. Okay. So now we're dealing with that consciousness of people who it's been too threatening to their personal um, relationship with the universe to
Yeah.
question that level of betrayal, the level
It
of
is.
betrayal that we have to
Yes.
deal with right now. And there are
Yes.
people on the right who are waking up to that quicker than people on the left. And those people are our allies, provided we provide a big enough tent to go, let's step off the battlefield onto this new playing field together. And because look at how much waste there is on that battlefield, how much energy is spent in the bullshit industry. Where,
You're mentioning a real big wild card. When these white militias
yeah,
discover they have been tricked,
yeah,
I find that a really interesting thought experiment. What are they going to do? Because they're prone to violence, and when they realize who the bad guys really are, it's going to be real interesting. I mean, I personally think history is going to repeat itself in the sense that we're going to have some serious revolts in this country, and it's getting closer all the time. And ironically, I think the northeastern states may secede. You know, we always worry about Texas or
If at first you don't succeed. Well,
there's a lot of,
well,
but
well,
anyway, let's end on the
yeah,
positive note
yeah.
that,
Okay. Well, I'd say the positive note is that, I know a lot of these people on the right who, and not one of them, well, actually, one of them actually still believes in Donald Trump. That, oh, there's stuff that's not being revealed. But that's a 1 out of 20. The
yeah,
rest of them are going, hey, we picked him just like you guys picked Kamala, and we had to decide which side we were on. We did not want to see the COVID lockdowns repeated, so we didn't vote for those people. Um, we didn't, just as, so I'm saying that there are issues, all of these complex issues that people made, they devolved to whichever side they felt was the lesser evil.
yes,
And so that's part of, my opinion of Donald Trump has not changed over the last 8 or 10 years. My view of the people who voted for him have. And those are anyone who believes in truth, beauty, and goodness is an ally in this
yep,
upcoming engagement. So, uh,
absolutely.
any final words before we sign off here? Anything you want to share?
I just want to emphasize that you're so right. We need to recognize each other as brothers and sisters and get on with making not just our country, but the world better for future generations. We've lost that too. So I think we can bring it back. I think it's not sentimentalism, it's not nationalism, it's just goodness. And you're right. Not everybody sees God, but everyone sees good. And that's what we need to be focusing on. I agree with you, Steve.
Thank you. Well, it's such a pleasure to be back in touch with you and have this longer conversation and
Yeah,
see. In fact, I love differences of opinion.
I do too.
I love differences of opinion because if you're with a group of people where there's trust at the heart level, you trust the fundamental goodness and integrity of that person, then what happens is that it just becomes information that deepens and broadens the view. And I keep thinking that using the technology that Jim Ruff, Ford, Tom Atlee, or so many of these other people have developed to aggregate the wisdom of groups of people, uh, separating them from the narratives and giving them a broader view. I would imagine that any group of ordinary citizens would come up with a legislation that would end the abortion uh, issue, that would end all of these divisive issues, so that we can move on together.
Yeah.
Uh, so I think that's part of the awakening. Um, I think one of the reasons why we haven't had the kind of democracy that we could have, is that our we don't believe we can do it. We don't believe that we're capable of that. We've learned that we're not capable of it. Now, part of this is learning, finding the wisdom traditions that we've lost without
Mm-hmm.
the dogmatic stuff, and going, wow, you know what? Like the Hermetic tradition that you're talking about, it's universal.
Yeah, no, you're right. We need to believe in ourselves and stop with, some savior coming to rescue us or a politician coming to rescue us. We need to own our future. And yeah, I agree. And we're almost there, I think, as a species where we are able to easily identify bad leaders and also want ownership of our life path. And I'm still optimistic despite all of the ugliness out there. I am.
There's a
I
scene
am. We
that
can do
comes to
it.
mind.
We can do it.
There's a scene that comes to mind. It just kind of flew into my head from the old movie from the 1950s, The African Queen. Humphrey Bogart, Katharine Hepburn, and there's some point where their boat is slogged down in the mud. They're slogged in the mud, and they just give up. They just lay down to die. They just give up. And the camera pans up, and you see that they are this far away from the open waters, but they don't know it. And
Right,
then the
right, right.
storm comes and it floats
Release.
them out into the open water. So it may be that our visions have been narrowed because of the toxic
Yes.
memes that have been
Yes.
circulating that are designed to disempower us. So,
Exactly. Exactly. They know, yes, they're feeding us disempowering video and narrative. And yeah, we have got to get our confidence back, we the people.
okay,
Absolutely. Yeah.
a pleasure. And
A pleasure on
um,
my end too.
I'm so glad we're reconnected. Welcome. I want to thank everybody for watching. Signs of the Upwising. This is a sign of the Upwising that people are waking up, um, to see the bigger picture and recognize that there is a way forward, and it has to do with the human heart. The heart of the matter is the matter of the heart.
Om Jai.
Okay. Namaste. Namaste. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.